So thank you for taking the time. Do I have my research correct that you moved to Freeport 57 years ago, 1968?
I moved to Freeport in 1968. We'd been living in Paris, my husband and I, my two older children, and my husband's company called us back. He informed me that he would be traveling to Europe as he had before
Hmm.
within Europe. And I said, well, I may as live where my sister lives. And so I moved to Freeport.
It's safe to say that Freeport has changed just a little bit in those almost 60 years, correct?
I've absolutely never regretted moving to Shreveport. I'd visited, of course, many times when prior to our move to Paris. I
Hmm.
loved the community. I already had a built-in community, people I knew because of my sister, so I felt very comfortable.
So you mentioned Paris, and Paris is in the title of your new book, The Last Train from Paris. And I know it's a collection of lifelong memories, but how long did it take you to actually write the book?
Oh, I started writing it through the many, many years. I started writing the first story, Last Train
Hmm.
from Paris, about my family, myself, for my grandson, who at the time was 9 and studying immigration in school. So
Hmm.
there I was, an immigrant, a refugee, and I started writing the story, and I had not come up with a title. And as Sam and I are going through it, he said, Grandma Mimi, it's the last train from Paris. And his school had show and tell for the immigration unit, bring an immigrant to school, and I was his immigrant. And Sam is now 33, way past 9 years old.
Right. Show and tell, but in a professional sense.
Well, many children brought people in their families, people they knew, but I was Sam's immigrant.
Right. So you have this book, and then you regularly work on presentations related to Holocaust survivors and Holocaust related films and all that. Um,
Yes.
how did you first get involved in that world besides just having personal experience? And I ask that because sometimes when people survive a traumatic thing, they go, I never want to think about that again. I never want to do anything. And then other people say, it's time to educate the world.
Well, I was always a very inquisitive child. When I had questions about the discussions that were in the kitchen off my bedroom,
Hmm.
uh, and my family spoke in a number of languages. If I didn't understand what was going on, I would ask the next morning, and my parents were always very responsive. They would answer in a way a child could understand. The
Hmm.
different stories were written at different times. The story about my cousin Madeleine, who did not survive, was written when Newsday actually had an article about Maurice Papon being captured. He was Pétain's under minister and told the Germans, take all the Jewish children. And I wrote about my little cousin Madeleine. The story about my husband's friend of the family, Fifi,
Hmm.
was written. I had heard about Fifi on my first trip to Paris in 1959. Many, many years later, I'm walking around Paris. We used to go every year after our return to the States. I saw a plaque on a building in honor of Fifi, but I had recently seen a movie, The Army of Shadows, which discussed that group, resistance group in Paris. So they were written through the years, and I became more involved after I retired from the Freeport schools and was looking for something to do and began to keep my husband company. He was a hidden child in France during the war, and he would tell his story, and I would tag along because his health was deteriorating. And the former director of education came to talk to my department at Nassau Community College, where I was
Hmm.
teaching as an adjunct, and said, we need facilitators for our tolerance programs. And I said, well, I can do that. I'm a trained facilitator. I had trouble at that time describing myself as a survivor because I grew up in Brooklyn. I could describe myself as a refugee, as an immigrant, and all that that entails. And as I said, I became more and more involved after my husband's death.
Did you find a lot of other people related to Holocaust related remembrance and programming in Freeport, or have you kind of been your own island?
I'm not sure there are too many people in Freeport. We are a diminishing population. I belong to a temple in Freeport, and I do remember in my first several years in Freeport, there were several survivors or refugees, depending on the time frame. I'm not sure anybody's left besides me, but I've I've always been a very outgoing person. I'm involved with a number of community organizations,
Sure.
and through my various organizations and chatter, I've met people in surrounding communities.
Yes, I'm aware that you are part of an authors group here at the Freeport Memorial Library. Does that
Yes.
mean that you have another book in the works, or is The Last Train from Paris fine for now?
No, it's not fine. The other writing group I belong to, most of the people in that group respond to the prompts with personal narratives.
Mhm,
Because I do that for the Freeport Library, I've sort of changed what I write, and I've been taking. I was an English and classics major in college, among other things. So I
mhm,
take myths and fables and fairy tales and put them into a modern context, such as Pinocchio being an angry teenage girl, that kind of thing. So I'm hoping to get that published. The library itself has published two anthologies from our group writing,
mhm.
and I'm very proud to have been included in those as well. So yes,
That's
it's the
under
stories.
Barbara, to
Yes, of
rudely
course,
interrupt
she's
you.
fabulous, absolutely wonderful, inspiring.
Sure. So back to the Freeport historical aspect of all this. When you first moved to Freeport, what was the nautical mile area like? Do you remember?
It was much quieter.
Hmm.
Uh, than it is now. A number of different restaurants, some still in business, many not.
Hmm.
My husband and I, and the children would go down on a regular basis, buy fish, eat out, walk along. It was a fun place to go to because it reminded me of Sheepshead Bay, where I grew up in Brooklyn, and it was very similar in context. So it was just a nice place to go to.
And then do you remember Freeport Stadium?
Is the stadium where the race cars were?
The race
Yes, I
cars
I
were
remember it existed. That's not my thing. So I never attended. I'm not even sure my children may have, but they may have. I don't remember that.
with that stadium. I mean, people know it for the races. There was some spring training or minor Brooklyn Dodgers kinds of things that happened there. That would obviously be before 1968. There was football stuff. There was professional wrestling. There were even some concerts. I think 1969, I think James Brown and some of the artists who played at Woodstock actually
That's
played there.
that's possible. In 1969, I was pregnant with my 3rd child, and I did some things, but not a lot of things. So,
Right.
no, I did not go to that concert.
Well, what are some of the earlier things that you remember from Freeport? Some of the businesses that you remember from the late 60s, early 70s?
Oh, I remember shopping on Main Street. When I first moved to Freeport, I lived on Smith Street, so I would pop. My older children went to school, of course, during the day. There's a 10-year difference. So Bill, the baby, was popped into the carriage. We'd walk down Main Street. I would
Hmm.
find various stores that I absolutely had to shop in, and loved talking to the people who worked in the stores. I still have friends whose parents had owned or relatives had owned the stores. So
Hmm.
it felt like my hometown, even though I grew up in Brooklyn.
Was one of those stores, I can't remember the store right now, but Ira Bryck was the proprietor. It was a children's wear
Oh,
store.
Barish's, of course. I bought all my children's clothing there. And Carol Green and my husband bought his suits at Irving's, which was owned by Larry Grebiner's father. Larry Grebiner is an old friend, a good friend. He was also my real estate agent. Sold my house, bought my apartment, etc.
And then I believe I saw you in person at the Shelly Peiken event that we had back in July. Did you know her family?
My children did. And my nephew and Shelley probably grew up together. I did not speak to my nephew, but I'm quite sure that that was the Colony Park crowd where my sister lived originally when she moved to Freeport. She later bought a house in Northwest Freeport. And many, many years later, when I found my apartment a bit too small for 3 children and my mother-in-law, we bought our house around the corner from my sister in Northwest Freeport. It had belonged to the Union Reform Temple, and they sold it to me for what I said, "This is what I can afford. Please accept my money." And,
Wow. So the Jewish population served more of a role than just providing a place of worship in the town.
Oh, absolutely. But what I loved about Freeport, besides obviously my affiliation with my temple, with the Reform Temple, is the diversity. When I came back, I did not want to live in what is called a golden ghetto. I wanted real world. I wanted a multicultural environment for my children, for myself, and another
Mhm.
reason for choosing Freeport.
Right. Growing up, I shouldn't say growing up, but living around Freeport for many years, did you wind up spending a lot of time in American neighboring towns, or was everything kind of Freeport centric for you?
Well, the first number of years I lived in Freeport, no car. I didn't know how to drive. When I finally learned how to drive, I did not have a car on a regular basis. So walking was, if I had needed something, I would walk to all the local stores. I also
Hmm.
taught at Freeport for 34 years. So
Hmm.
definitely very Freeport oriented. I was at the Dodd Junior High School for 24 years. And then I was at Giblin. I'm a literacy specialist. So I was the reading teacher at Giblin for 10 years until my retirement.
So bringing it back to literacy and the library, I mean, this particular building I know has expanded over the years. I believe it went from one building to two buildings to three
Yes,
buildings. Um, do you have any early memories of the library
I
from?
loved coming to the library. Story hour from my kids. I'm a reader, so lots of books for me. But I'm forever grateful to the library because when I was doing both of my graduate programs, I have a master's in reading and a professional diploma in special education. I could not spend a great deal of time doing research at the Adelphi Library. So I put in my request at the Freeport Library for the various articles, etc., that I needed, and they were always made available for me for the length of time that I needed them. So forever grateful that I could be more comfortable doing my research, etc.
But to confirm, the library used to be a lot smaller than it
Oh,
is now.
yes, but not in capacity and not in willingness to help.
Right. So, what were other town staples? Because, yes, you were a family-oriented person, but for example, where did people go grocery shopping in the late 60s, early 70s around here?
I went to the supermarket that was around the corner, which is now Gala, and they were wonderful because in the latter parts of my pregnancy, when it was hard for me to get out or to carry things, they were kind enough to deliver whatever it was I was
Hmm.
purchasing. So I could walk. Well, we didn't have a CVS. There was a local. There were several local pharmacies. Of course, the post office, the library for my entertainment for the kiddies. I could walk everywhere I wanted to. Um, I even walked with Bill down to Randall Park from Smith and Merrick to
Hmm.
Randall Park and then further down onto the mile. I could not do that today. And I live within the same distance, but then I could and did.
Was that supermarket that's Gowan now, was that an associated?
No, it may have been Key Food. Right now, I'm blanking out. I'm sure it's going to pop up in my brain in the middle of the night, but I can't
So,
remember right now.
what I'm getting at is that is still a supermarket. The post
Yes,
office is still a post
of
office,
course, and
and
a
the
beautiful one.
library's still a
I have
library.
to say, I used to take, we've always entertained a lot, my husband and I. Many of
Mhm.
our people we entertained were his clients from Europe. And I made a point of bringing them around Freeport, showing them various sites, including the post office that has some wonderful murals, WPA art. And when I was at the junior high school, Newsday at that time had a Kids Day publication, and my
Mhm.
students uh, submitted articles for and were printed for a Kids Day publication. So many of them had been born in Freeport, but really didn't know Freeport. So we explored Freeport and its various interesting places.
That's interesting to hear that you stuck here all these years. When you first moved to Freeport, did you know that it was going to be like a lifelong residence for you?
Not no. Well, actually, no, because we were given the opportunity twice to move back to Europe. My husband was offered a job in Brussels,
Hmm.
and I was not happy with that. And then he was offered a job in Geneva.
Hmm.
And I went to Geneva, found an apartment, found a school for my children, and then came home and really thought about it and decided that I really like being in Freeport. I was concerned about moving once more back to Europe, three children and a mother-in-law who had come from France and then
Hmm.
would come back with me to Europe. It got very complicated. And at that point, my parents' health was declining. And
Hmm.
I said, I need to be at least in the States, if not in Florida or in Brooklyn, where they were living at the time.
Sure. Question a different direction. One of the first times I flew overseas, I get off the airplane in Japan at Narita Airport, and I'm going through immigration. I look down at in the immigration section, the posts, like it's not a velvet rope, but the stanchion, the little pole thing that keeps you in your lane. I looked down and it said it was made in Bayshore. And here I am in the other side of the world and go, okay, that's a couple towns over from Long Island. In all of your travels around Europe, did you ever encounter anything or anyone that was from Freeport or Merrick or Belmore or surrounding towns?
Not really. I think the first year I was in Paris before I that way I when I came I went to Paris as a student to meet my family that may have survived. I'd heard the legend that if you sit at the Café de la Paix, you meet anybody that you've ever known in your life at one point or another. So I'm
Hmm.
sitting at the Café de la Paix, 1959, and chatting with a friend, and there comes one of my old high school buddies who I had not seen since high school. I graduated early. And I said, "Don, how nice to see you." But, as far as meeting Long Island people, no, I not really, not really.
Got it. It was worth a try and asking. But going back to your writers group, tell me more about that, about what you're still hoping to express creatively.
It depends on the group. Now, with Barbara's group, where we do personal narratives, we all have so many stories to tell. And on a personal level, that sounds redundant. I think it's
Hmm.
important. I think it's important to tell your family stories to make that connection with the past, the present, and the future. So after I had written many years ago, when I wrote Sam's story, I have two much younger grandchildren. They are now 25 and 20, but
Hmm.
I've been telling them family stories since their infancy. So the family stories are one kind of pleasure I have. The stories that I write for my other group, they stretch my brain. They make me think about why the fables, the myths, the fairy tales have remained in existence for so many thousands of years, actually. And what do we learn from them today? So, although occasionally I may write a personal narrative for that group, more often I don't.
More often you don't. So
Right.
for you, it sounds like it's a creative exercise and it's also something to do. And it's also actually expressing yourself, that it hits on a few levels.
Absolutely creative. Absolutely. I've always considered myself a creative person. At one time, I was an art major, decided I didn't want to teach art. I didn't know what to
Hmm.
do with it professionally. I studied at the École du Louvre in Paris, thinking perhaps I would work in a museum at some day. I came home and fell backwards into teaching, and never looked back because I did love teaching the students that I had. But I love the creativity of teaching. So creativity, I guess, is my mantra, so to speak.
I find that teachers are very often creative people who themselves are writers or authors or painters or musicians. Back when you were teaching, was that the case back then? In that a lot of them were not frustrated creatives, but people who were in their off time creating?
I'm not sure. My concept of my teaching philosophy, I'm the queen of my classroom. And I can bring in the music, the art, the literature that corresponds to material they may be studying in social studies or in science. Many of
Hmm.
my students were in my class because they did not do well on the state reading assessments.
Yeah.
So I always felt that my job was to enhance their outlook on life besides their reading skills. And so I would bring in everything that would be appropriate. When we studied civil rights, we put Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk on trial. and there was somebody in the before breaking an entry,
Yeah.
also Goldilocks, depending on the class. So one student was the judge. The person on trial had a lawyer. We had a defense lawyer, a prosecuting attorney. We had a jury. We presented. I had a lot of fun. When they had read a play in which the main character was um, a principal who had committed murder in his school, the kids were so enchanted with this that they said, I'd like to, it was a short story. They wrote it into a play, and I used a video camera and filmed it. And the assistant principal at the time was kind enough to play the bad guy. We had an enormous amount of fun doing all these kinds of things. And of course, Newsday and etc.
So it sounds like your lesson plans were also part of the creative process.
Oh, of course, of course.
Well, I say that because a lot of my teachers growing up, they were just giving you the ditto out of the workbook, or it was very busy work oriented. Whereas it sounds like all these years, you've always, whether or not you're writing a book, you found ways to make your situation creative and unique.
I think children learn better when they can when
Hmm.
they use their brain. We had a program, I think it may still be in the school, but I'm not sure, called Challenge. It was for the gifted children. And I brought many of the elements of that program into my students, and they said, we can't do that. We're not in the challenge class. And I said, these are brain games. Why not? And we did.
Hmm. And you do. So one of the things I called out before is how Long Island has changed very much. And there was a Billy Joel song on his last full album called No Man's Land. And it was about how Long Island just had nothing going on and was very boring. And these days, I find it's the exact opposite. There's too much to do. There's too many restaurants. There's too many festivals. There's hotels. There's concerts. There's sports teams, etc. And so where I'm going with that is growing up on Long Island, until a certain point, I felt it was very boring and you kind of needed New York City to get arts and excitement. In your case, it sounds like you were creating your own excitement, but did you ever see Long Island as being boring or second class compared to New York City?
Absolutely not. I'm a museum mommy. There are museums. There are museums. Obviously, I took my own children into the city, but there are museums on Long Island, and we explored every single one of them frequently. So absolutely not. And other venues, outdoor street fairs, at craft shows. I loved Huntington when I lived, when my children were young,
Hmm.
because they had many activities. So we'd go to the book review, the old bookstore. We'd walk around that beautiful
Yeah.
park. It reminded me of Paris, actually, that particular area. We'd go out east. It reminded me of Brittany, where we spent our summer vacations. So we definitely explored all that Long Island could ever offer to us.
In terms of Freeport, I didn't ask you about the Freeport Rec Center. Were you a member? Are you a member of that institution?
I was a member, and I'm very proud to say that my daughter was on the committee that was a student advisor that helped design the needs for the rec center. And
Hmm.
she was one of the committee members that laid the cornerstone. So yeah, we've been involved with the rec center. I used to go there with my youngest son before he went to camp and chill out. And my students would be there, and they would come over and say hello. And I said, hello, nice to see you. I hope you're having a wonderful summer. It's downtime.
Right. So you knew to take your summers as a teacher.
Exactly.
Well, a lot of teachers are then camp counselors so their kids can go to camp for free.
Nah, my children went to USDAN, the Camp for the Performing and Creative Arts. So Elizabeth was offered a scholarship with the American Ballet Theater at 16. She was already taking classes at Hunter. And I held my breath because I was the kind of mommy that did not want to say, you can't do that. But I didn't want her to do that. So we had many discussions, and off she went to Brandeis. Peter was taking art lessons at the Metropolitan.
Hmm.
And he went off to Carnegie Mellon at 16. Bill studied computers. He was the computer kid in Freeport. And when he was in Freeport High School, he not only tutored many of the faculty on how to use a computer, he and Dr. Hayes set up the system in completely computerized the school system. Now,
Hmm.
Bill's grades could have been better, and I once asked him, "How come you didn't fiddle with your grades?" And he says, "That wouldn't have been the right thing to do." But in the middle of the night, I'd get a call from Dr. Hayes. "Bill, are you ready? The computer crashed. We need you to fix things." And off he would go to the administration building in the middle of the night and do what he had to do with the computer. He won an award today for being absolutely outstanding in his field, which is now cybersecurity. So Freeport school, my children did very well in Freeport schools.
Got it. You mentioned Usedan. I did one summer there that was not very successful for me,
Oh,
but Mariah Carey went there, and a lot of people who have had long artistic careers went there. That must have been a very long bus ride from Freeport.
well, it was about 45 minutes. You know, my grandchildren, the two younger ones, Sam was a city kid, but the two younger ones grew up in Selden, middle country schools. They went to Usedan. So we're a USDAN family. And the wonderful thing about USDAN is that when Elizabeth was accepted to Brandeis and she was offered scholarship money, etc., but money was tight for us at the time. So I
Hmm.
called Brandeis and I said, "Is there anything we can do to make the situation better?" And they said, "Well, first of all, you filled out your FAF form incorrectly. We'll help you do that." I said, "Oh, okay. Will you come down to Boston?" So I did, and we corrected whatever mistakes I made. And then they said, "Where did your daughter go to camp?" I said, "USDAN." Brandeis said, "We have a USDAN scholarship." And they awarded it to her. And off she went to Brandeis, a very happy child.
So that is just one of those things where that wouldn't have happened had you not had that Long Island or really Freeport upbringing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are there other coincidences along those lines that pretty much only could have happened because your family was here? And it's okay if the answer is no.
Well, off the top of my head, no. We've been very happy here. Um, my children and I have made lifelong friends. Uh, I just feel very rooted to being in Freeport.
These days, do you have any favorite restaurants in Freeport when you have the opportunity to dine out?
I'm an equal opportunity Nasha eater.
Sure.
And I do like to cook. So in the last 2 years, social situations changed. COVID changed a lot. So I don't go out as often as I used to, but I go to Pier 95. I go to Halfway Down. There are new restaurants I haven't yet tried and plan to. So keep exploring.
Keep exploring. That's been a
Yeah.
consistent topic of our conversation with
Yes.
the keeping on exploring. So, if I can sum up what we've talked about so far, you've been very active in the community since you moved here all these years ago. The book that you wrote, The Last Train from Paris, not the last thing you've written, not the last thing you plan on writing. You're very active here with the library. You formed a series of communities amongst family and friends and people who
There's something
work
else
here.
that I'd like to add. I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Please.
an important part of my life is I'm on the board of the Long Island Arts Council in Freeport. I am their recording secretary, and I coordinate various programs. So one of my fellow board members and I do the author talks programs. So
Hmm.
sometimes theme based, sometimes whatever. I coordinate with local schools, making sure that the art and the creative work of our local students, Freeport and surrounding communities, are showcased by us. And I just do whenever there's a void in whatever programs we're planning, if I can help, I'll say, I can do that. I can take, whatever. So I'm very
Sure.
much involved with the Long Island Arts Council.
So, do you also work because of the Arts Council with the Historical Society?
Not as much as I'd like to, but I keep thinking of, we need to reach out. I need to come up with stuff, but I haven't done as much as I want to. Between my current commitments to the Long Island Arts Council, my two writing groups,
Hmm.
um, the extensive work I do for the museum, including chairing a film program.
Hmm.
I've also become involved with revitalizing our temple membership.
Mhm.
So that tonight where I'm having a meeting here to deal with what kind of programs can we offer to the community through our temple? Not necessarily Jewish members of the communities, but that will bring people in to think about interesting areas. So
I'm looking forward to seeing that kind of programming, and we will share information about that.
thank
In
you. The
terms of the
last,
book
uh,
talks, is that's also continuing and
absolutely, absolutely. The last program we did for the temple was something we had done I had done at the museum, and it was a screening of The Great Dictator, which is so relevant even today. And so we had a very nice turnout, and we're looking forward to deciding what our next activity will be.
so I'm just not hearing that you sleep very much. That's also recurring.
I'm a morning person. I wake up between 6 and 7. I hit my computer because I want to see what's going on in the world. And I have family that lives in the UK and France and Israel that I'm very close with. So I gather, family news. I see what else is doing out there. I read the paper online and then I go in and read the paper in the hard copy along with my coffee and croissant.
So
And then I sit down to work.
you're in the middle of all those time zones and keeping the peace for all those different people's
Not the peace. We love talking to each other, and I'm very lucky that my both my Israeli family, except for what has been happening the last few years, and my
yeah.
French family travel back and forth. And I would travel extensively until COVID sort of nipped that in the bud.
Do you have another trip, health and world events permitting, for France ahead of you, or you're
Well,
good?
I went back to Portugal this summer
Hmm.
because I realized through something that occurred at the museum that I was one of the visa recipients issued by Aristides Sousa Mendes, who issued thousands of visas for refugees against his government order. And I'm probably the only visa recipient that has ever visited his birthplace in the museum there. So I was interviewed by Portuguese TV. I was in the Portuguese papers. So, and I was an educational workshop for Holocaust educators all over the country and Venezuela. So that was interesting. That was this past summer. This coming year, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I think about it, but I'm not sure, especially because of the recent air traffic snarl ups. I'm not too thrilled about hanging out in an airport for X amount of hours. So thinking, but not making plans yet.
Understood. The honor from Portugal and what you said about Venezuela, is that in the slideshow that you mentioned as having prepared?
It's the last story in the book because when I realized that I was a recipient indeed, because I think my mother must have been a part-time squirrel. She kept all the documents that related to our former life. And I realized as I'm hearing about Sousa Mendes,
Hmm.
I'm visualizing some of the documents with the Portuguese stamp on it. And I said, that's me. So that was quite an interesting connection.
Got it. So I have learned a lot. It sounds like there's even more to learn with what's being written, the slideshow that I still have to watch, and the TV segment that I still have to watch. So thank you for being one of the most inspirational Freeporters imaginable, and looking forward on what's to come.
Thank you so much for interviewing me. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share some of my ideas and experiences. So thank you.
Outrocast.